So welcome to the APAC AIAC Roundtable. This is usually what happens on a very early morning at conference. And this is where anybody who supervises music therapy pre-internship or internship students uh, can talk about some of their concerns, some of their things that they have found to be really helpful, to ask questions, and the committee members are here to help answer those questions and address concerns, and we are taking notes and we'll bring these things back to the committees for potential resolution. Usually this is a place for internship folks and faculty to sort of have a dialogue in a way that we don't otherwise get to have outside of our own individual contexts. So it's a little strange being on Zoom. So I created a Google Doc that's linked in the chat, and I can link it as many times as we need to if you don't see it. Please go there and feel free to type your questions or your concerns. Usually we use a flip chart and put topics down, and then we use those to see sort of what are some of the common themes and use that to springboard the conversation. So in absence of a flip chart, I think this is a nice place where everybody can see the same thing and it wouldn't just be me taking notes or having to watch a scrolling chat. Several people typing, this is fantastic. The first thing that I would like to, I'm going to, I think when we talk about them, I'm going to just highlight the first word or something so I know what we've gotten to. I want to start with this one. We're finding 6 months is sometimes not enough time for 1,000 hours despite working 40 hours a week. What other indirect hours can we provide for students considering most relocate to internships that may be unpaid? I would like more information on this because 40 hours a week would give you enough hours. So is it a restriction in how you're counting those hours? I don't necessarily, if you're working a 40-hour week, those hours should all count. Pre-internship, the minimum is 180, yes. Whoever typed this one about the 6 months, can you unmute and address this with us?
Yes. Hi, my name is Maria Gracia, or MG. I am the internship director at Children's National in the Center for Cancer and Blood Disorders. And this is more specific, I think, to hospital sites since the clearance sometimes can take a little bit longer and students relocate for January through June. But in past, we have found that even though even though interns are here for 6 months, sometimes a little bit longer, there's sometimes when they may get sick and they can't come in. And so that sometimes takes away 8 hours here or there. And the direct hours do not add up to 1,000. And it's happened to the past 3 interns. So I wanted to know if indirect hours, like the days that they are sick, if they could make those hours up during the weekend and whatnot, because sometimes their lease is up and we can't ask them to stay here longer than needed.
So this is one of the really common misconceptions, and I'm not sure how it started. It may have started with some program director putting a restriction in, like our students have to have so much percentage of direct contact time or this or that, but that is a program restriction and not an AMTA restriction. AMTA does not mandate how many hours must be direct contact. You're learning by being in that environment, by working with your colleagues and having those day-to-day real life experiences. You wouldn't want to go to work and be working really hard, and you have light days and you have heavy days, but being told that you're only going to get paid for 30 hours because you didn't see patients during that time. That doesn't mean you weren't working. That doesn't mean that you weren't there learning and participating. So it's up to the program and how they're counting it. And some schools do have higher standards regarding a percentage of direct contact time. That's up to the schools, and that's acceptable if that's what their contract is. But there's nothing about in the internship guidelines that says you must have so many hours of direct contact time. Would someone from AIAC please confirm that?
Yes, I can jump in and say that's definitely true. The guidelines don't say how many have to be indirect or direct.
Okay, thank you so much for clearing that up. I was under the misconception that we always count administrative work when they're on site. I think it was more of when they were off site because, you know, some things do happen in students' personal lives, and then that does take away the hours that they can be present on site. But even reading Stephanie's comment is really validating to know that they can do all these things as we've been doing.
Yes. Yes. They are students, and so they are not considered professional music therapists where you would count their productivity in the same way. Productivity for students includes researching about the people that they're going to be working with. It includes planning sessions, which takes longer than it would for a seasoned professional. So yes, those sorts of things can count. And it's up to you and as an internship director and the school if you want to connect with them about what they would approve. But AMTA doesn't dictate what does and doesn't count specifically. There are things that can't count, but in general, daily activities should count. Okay, just curious, if you are in a position to offer an intern a job with your company or agency when in the 6-month internship, does that offer typically happen? So what you're saying is, are they an employee during their internship? Please clarify.
That was my question. I was wondering, like in the 6 months, is that something you would typically offer after 2 months of the internship, after 3 months, at the end of 5? Is there somewhere in the internship timeline you would make that offer a possibility for that intern?
So are you talking about employing them in some ancillary position or as a music therapist?
At the end of, there's a job opening. At the end of the 6 months, we want you to be our employee, but you're not finished with the internship yet. But we kind of have you in this, provided all things go well, you can be our employee. Like, when does that offer occur in that 6-month window?
It can occur whenever the employer feels that they're ready and they want to make that commitment.
Okay.
Oh, not clap, raise hand, that's it.
Can I just jump in?
Yes.
This is Lauren, one of the co-chairs. Sorry, my video has to be off. It is a great question. I love it because it talks about the position of power of how can that student negotiate a salary, or what if they don't want to accept it? Like, how does that impact the relationship? So those kind of ethical things are important to think about when deciding when to offer it to them, and having that honest conversation and maybe letting the academic advisor know so that they could be on the lookout and help guide the student.
This is Susan from Big Ben Hospice in Tallahassee. I just wanted to jump in too because I've been in this position several times. I've never felt comfortable having that conversation or offering in that way before the halfway point. It typically has happened for us in around month 5, and I agree with what Lauren said about the power dynamic and involving the academic program director. Or encouraging the student, just having open conversations about that. And then also making sure that they understand that nothing in the internship is contingent upon employment and vice versa, that there is, no bias there, and that all of their conversations about employment and their salary and all of those pieces happens with the HR staff, not the internship supervisors, if that makes any sense. We're in a privileged place in our agency that we have a separate department for that. So that is helpful.
I just wanted to add in as well. This is Eve. I'm the co-chair of AIC. That you assume the risk when you're offering or talking about employment, and to be careful on the language you use, because an intern who completes your internship is not a music therapist yet, right? They still need to do a board certification. So you want to be sure that there's an understanding there. Someone's not hired immediately, then maybe at your facility as a music therapist, but as something else, a music specialist or whatnot. And sometimes that piece can get really confusing to interns who are like, well, you said I could have this job, but now you're saying I have to be this title. So just, you're assuming a risk there. And also assuming if you talk about this too early, that the intern might think it's a in the bag from the moment you start talking about it.
Great information, and also I'm appreciating the chat sharing as well. I'm not reading those. You can read those yourself, but the committee will be copying the chat and making sure we have that. But it seems like it's all in line with what we're talking about. And the guidelines are very much flexible by the school and the facility to decide. So there is no, I don't think, typical time, but I would think toward the end. One question I had when I read that, something that has come up frequently is about wanting to pay students and not being able to hire them for the internship, but wanting to give them another job at the facility where so it gets a little tricky, because then they have a dual relationship with the people in the facility. And so there's a lot of things to consider. I appreciate wanting them to have a paid job, but it wouldn't count toward their internship time if it's a separate job. And it does create some ethical dilemmas potentially. So I love the comment of the next one under the questions: are paid internships an option? It is rare in music therapy, and I would say it's absolutely an option. As long as the job description is clear and directly reflecting that it's an internship and the responsibilities are the same as the internship. There are a lot of places that offer stipends and things like that. So how what you call it and how you do it, I guess just needs to be cleared through your HR or legal department. Right, different than a paycheck. So there's a different, it would be more like a contract payment than an employee. And again, the AMTA standards and internship guidelines say nothing about paying or not paying, that's a legal and ethical issue to sort out with your own company. Due to COVID-19, some students are coming to internship without 200 practicum hours. Well, that is not, they don't have to have 200, they have to have 180. And they have to have it. They might not look like it, like you're used to. They might not be very much, if any, direct client contact or in-person contact. So it looks very different, but they are not eligible for internship without 180 pre-internship hours, period. So you are not obligated to accept students that do not have those required hours. AIAC, do you have any difference of opinion?
I would just say, you know, it's up to the program director to ensure and keep track and count that. So if they've written that letter of eligibility, then they've done their job, and that's
Also, this is Chrissy Watson, Southeast Rep. I know that some people, if you're doing university affiliated, you know, you can work with the university, maybe that intern, I don't know, it's just so the academic faculty can figure that out along with the supervisor when it's university affiliated. So
eligibility for internship is 180 pre-op.
oh, well, there you go. Never mind.
So
No good.
if AIAC had laxed their guidelines on that.
No, right?
Okay. So there you have it. 180 hours pre-internship, but it's going to look different for these folks. They're going to have a lot more of scenarios and video watching and observations, and maybe a little telehealth, and a lot less hands-on. So their needs coming in will be different, and that's something that you're going to need to consider in when you're accepting students. Is this something that you can address and are willing to do? I hope so. But your internship, especially the early part of it, might need to be a little bit different, since these students have differing experiences than what we're traditionally used to seeing. Are people seeing an uptick in managing mental health concerns with interns? I will say that there is quite a lot of literature on this with college-age students in general, so I would expect for sure that it applies to interns. And it looks from the comments that people are adding that that is absolutely true. So when there are more mental health concerns, do you as supervisors feel like you have resources? Are you connecting to the resources that that student still has access to through the institutions where they got their training?
I'd rather just speak than write. As far as the mental health concerns, yes, we've seen it. I'm in a small private practice in Charlotte, and we currently have actually three university affiliated interns, two from one school and one from another school. I don't access resources that they have at their school, but rather provide them resources that they can access in the community that they're in now. So we spend a lot of time on self-care. Our interns write personal goals to help them, and mostly because of COVID, those have been focused on self-care activities.
Although we have not had an intern since we've become a national roster internship site, one of the first things we did as a university affiliated was had students read a self-care book. That was part of one of their assignments, and they got credit for reading that book and talking about that with the supervisor in the supervisor meetings initially, which is me. As a private practice, Central Ohio Music Therapy, we make sure that self-care is very important, because we feel strongly that if the student doesn't have the self-care skills to manage themselves, then they cannot be an effective therapist for the clients.
These are very important topics. And again, it looks pretty different than it used to. So we're having to sort of adapt and adjust, and probably what our experiences were as interns are pretty different than what students are experiencing right now.
Amy, you have a question up about asking questions about the AMTA supervision course. I'm not totally sure what you're looking for. If you wouldn't.
Oh, just can you remind? I had a question about the content of the supervision course regarding an intern issue, and I was wondering if you could remind us who we would email about the question about the content of the course itself.
So you could ask any of the reps or the Lauren or myself in terms of the content. Also at and Jane, help me out here. At AMTA, I don't know if there's an overview of what's covered on the e-course that we've done, but we can give you an overview of what's covered in the areas covered. But then if you
yeah, it's just a question about something in the course itself.
Okay, so actually Lauren and I would probably be your best go-to.
Okay.
So
But Eve, you're correct. The e-course does have a description, and I believe it lists the content. But Amy, if you have a specific question, totally go to Eve and Lauren. Yeah.
Thank you.
We just recently became a national roster internship. Yay, yay is right. Whoever wrote that, congratulations. I had a question about informed consent about confidentiality for interns. I want to make a document about this, but not sure where to put it in terms of our documents. Does anyone else have this kind of a form, or is it in the national guidelines anywhere?
That was me. I'm in Frisco at Sound Starts. Can y'all hear me okay with the mask?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, we just became national roster in September, and we have an intern right now that is, I guess, considered now national roster intern. But we've had an experience in the past with an intern not realizing that her training information was also shared with her academic advisor, even though it was an academy or a university affiliated internship. And so we don't know, we're going to make that document so that every intern has the informed consent that, hey, this kind of information can be shared with all your supervisors, your academic advisor, your AIAC and everything. And then, if there's anything that won't be shared that is actually confidential between the intern and the internship director or another supervisor. But we didn't know if that needed to be officially also sent with our other stuff to the committee, or if we could just put it somewhere in our documents or what.
So the AIAC looks for that information reflecting what will be sent to the academic folks. and we asked for that in a lot of the documents already, so it's there. So, you know, on all the evaluations, there's a copy of this will be sent to. We asked for that on the dismissal policy. So those places where we ask for it is where that shows up. If you want to create additional forms, that's fine. You can do that within your setting. We don't necessarily need to see those, although sometimes it's nice to know what people are doing because then we can share best practices. But we don't have to have those. If we've checked off that you've indicated where on the forms that we're looking at, then we're in good shape.
Okay, awesome.
You
Thank
can always add.
Thanks.
Just as a rule of thumb to reinforce this, the more often you repeat and it shows up in lots of different documents, the better it is, because then there's less chance of missing it. So we like to include those things. I'm reading that, you know, the informed consent is written into the university affiliated contract. So those sort of things are going to continue to show up and let folks know that information is shared.
I think that's a great idea to always be upfront and honest with the intern of what is confidential, what's not, where's that line, and even though it's in the different documents where things are going, having it in the orientation checklist and making sure you go over that with every student is a great practice.
Actually, if you don't mind, that this is actually related to my question about the supervision training, because as I understood the training, it indicated that you know, certain aspects of the relationship were confidential, but that the internship directors were mandatory reporters, and so I didn't really understand that specifically, since most of the students are not minors. But we can talk about that offline if it's.
And I'm guessing, this is Lauren from the AIC, I'm guessing you're talking about, we talked about in the online training about how if you tell me something bad happened with your dog, you had to rush him to the vet that morning, that's something that I would not need to share with your academic advisor. You know, I would need to share how your progress towards the competencies was going. But also, if somebody is suicidal, that can't be ignored. If you learn about any kind of Title IX things, and this is maybe something to get, I think we've had different debates about this between our two groups. You know, are the internship directors Title IX mandated reporters? They don't work for the university. So that's maybe something to get more clarification on.
Lauren, I just want to say it depends on the state. Because in New York, internship directors are mandatory reporters, as are educators, if they hold a state license. So it really depends on the state.
Thank you.
And with that state license, one assumes that they've been trained in what they need to do. Where the majority of at least national roster are not necessarily trained in the Title IX unless they've had experience within the academic settings.
So some things that have come up recently in my own feed relate to university affiliated internships. Do we have, so we have some faculty here, and I think we probably have some university affiliated supervisors. One of the things that has come up is the music therapist, the supervisor, solicit and or students soliciting partnerships and agreeing to work with each other and accepting, and then going to the school and saying, we've got this, can we create an agreement? And that creates a bit of a sticky wicket if the school does not want accept that person's experience or placement as being the best fit for the student, or if there can't be an agreement in terms of the content of the internship and what the policies are, and how that's going to look, like how many hours and what's the intern going to be doing in terms of their responsibilities. All of those things are part of the agreement that the university is responsible for sorting out and signing off on. So it's not as simple as, oh, good, you agreed to do it, let's sign the dotted line. Because then when there are problems in the university affiliated internship, it's the university that's responsible. So you can't advertise that you have a university affiliated internship if you don't have an agreement in place. You might have it with a certain school, but that doesn't mean that you have one with anybody else. And students are confused by that. So this can be kind of a sticky situation, and we've had several kind of concerning situations arise this year already. So I just wonder, does anybody have any questions or experience with university affiliated internships that they would like to share?
With our 3 interns, and I think I said earlier, we have 2 from one local university and another one from a farther away university, but still in a kind of normal area. The university affiliated internships started with a contact from the academic director to our private practice. And then we conducted got reference letters, and we conducted, called the references to get information about the student. And then if we decided that they were somebody that might be a good fit for our practice, then we brought them in for an interview. If we decided, no, we're not going to take them, and no further action was needed, and we let the university or academic director know. If we did decide to accept them as an intern, then we created the contract.
That's absolutely textbook procedure. And the facility get to decide who they accept and who they don't. But it's a mutual decision as to what the workload is going to be, and what the goals and outcomes are. That's sort of part of the mutual affiliation process, and the university helps set a lot of the policies and things as well. So, Melissa, thank you for taking on those interns.
I'll just say sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say we have university affiliated internships, and I appreciated the guidelines and the meetings that were held. So that was really nice to clarify everything. All of our supervisors have done, or most of them did a 5-hour ethics training, so they all got that. It actually was 6 hours. And our university is providing Title IX training for all of our internship directors. Again, I live in New York, so it's a different world here. And they are all mandatory reporters. So we're giving them that as well. But I just wanted to thank you for doing that, university affiliated training was it was helpful. I think a few of our supervisors actually came, so that was good too.
Thank you for that. And I'm really glad that the school is supporting those non-staff sort of educators. I see something here on the document. It says, my facility is very difficult my facility is very difficult to work with in regards to coming to an agreement with academic institutions. How much should the student be kept in the loop about this process? I feel very in the middle of these processes and have been put into very difficult position of telling students we're unable to come to an agreement. To be clear, the language that is required is very clear to the student throughout the entire process.
So can I just ask, is this a legal affiliation that we're talking about or an internship agreement? Because they're two different documents and processes through the national roster, right? The legal affiliation is the people in the suits and the ties and the briefcases talk legalese and cross the T's and dot the I's. So it's all about liability, right? So they agree at that level, which is typically above at least my pay grade. I'm not usually involved at that level. So telling the student what we ask to have in the application for the student is a statement that says if a legal affiliation is required, it must be in place prior to the start of your internship. And then we update the intern on that piece of it alone. And we don't get into the minutia, at least I don't, because again, it's stuff well beyond what we have control over. Certainly having the conversation with the academic person saying it's stuck at levels, I'm stuck, you're stuck, and to see if we can't use our resources to push it. But I don't typically share a ton of that with the intern. Just knowing that up front it has to be in place if it indeed is the legal affiliation.
I've had situations where the school had language that they insisted upon and the facilities wouldn't accept it. And usually we can come up with something to make it work, but not always. And I've also had situations where there's a large school system or a hospital setting and they do not allow any changing of their language whatsoever. And the university says, but this one word, and it's a deadlock. So it does happen and it's really unfortunate. And so I don't think the student needs to be in on that. They just need to know that it's being processed and then they need to know the outcome, hopefully in a timely fashion, because far too often this ends up happening right as the student, like at the last minute, as the student's expecting to start. So if we can get those agreements done earlier, it's better, but it's not always possible. Come back to this idea of students not having the same kind of clinical experiences as we would prefer and has traditionally been required. COVID, it's a thing. So some schools are requiring and finding ways to get in person. Other schools do not have the resources or flexibility or community source placements are not able to accept people and they don't have enough placements for people. There are so many things happening right now. So it is a thing that students do not always have the in-person contact. If they have met the bare minimum of, sort of the requirements according to the standards for those 180 hours, they've had multiple placements, even if it's not in person. They've created treatment plan, gone through the treatment process. even hypothetically by watching videos and then seeing what happened in real life and then saying what they would do next and having these process conversations like you would in supervision. Even if what they're doing as their experience is different, they've had multiple placements and they've met the hours and they've practiced all the steps in the music therapy processes that you would expect throughout your pre-internship training, they would be eligible for internship. And then it becomes the internship supervisor's decision as to whether they can provide what this student needs to take them on. There is no standard for a specific amount of in-person contact. There is a standard for supervision requirements, but not for the amount of in-person contact.
And if you go back to the competencies, then you can measure many, many things in non-traditional ways, right? So, and we've just seen people get really creative on how different things fit into the competencies. And as Mary Jane used to say, competencies are your friend. So become really, really familiar with them.
Regarding the internship agreement, why is it that internship sites have to communicate with universities regarding what competencies will or will not be covered during internship, but universities do not need to communicate what competencies are not covered in the academic curriculum? Well, there is a problem with that because universities do. They need to provide that individualized plan for every student and identify which areas have not been met and like satisfied in terms of the competencies, and that needs to be part of a goal during internship. And if it's not something that the internship covers, then there needs to be a plan for how the student's going to meet that competency. So if you're an internship supervisor and you are not receiving this personalized information regarding students and the competencies and what their internship goals and expectations are from the school, then you should be asking for that. I'm scrolling down under concerns. I see some new entries. We use a professional disposition assessment, baseline and gateway, that we developed from a document created by Jim at Radford years ago with his permission. The one Jim developed is great. It is. I just looked at it again and I'm grateful for it. Students seem to appreciate it as well since it provides specific feedback. So that is a comment.
If I can, that comment just kind of spurs a bit of an idea in terms of, wouldn't it be swell if we could warehouse some of these best practices from both the academic and the national roster? You know, things like what you just mentioned, Becky, in the assessment. And there's dozens and dozens and probably way more than that. But to be sort of a repository for this information, and then people have extra tools that they could use. I'm not sure who would be the keeper of, but I'm throwing it out there anyways as a start.
Yeah, not everybody's allowed or able to use dispositions in their program, and some programs are not able to have barriers, but they are certainly good tools that can be utilized in other ways. So yeah, it would be nice to have a repository of things like that. Going back to the adequate preparation for internship, I received a direct message that this is beyond just the clinical experience, and it includes musicianship. And I think that musicianship, those musical competencies, you're not eligible for internship if you don't have musical competency. And as an internship supervisor, you might even want to ask the school, can I see the requirements for your musical competencies? And then you can utilize something off of that in your interview to sort of check off and confirm that this person is indeed proficient. You are not required to accept people who do not have those minimum competencies because they technically really aren't eligible. And I am co-chair of the Academic Program Approval Committee, and I am giving you permission to question these programs and hold them accountable for their students' abilities and the letters that they write in support of these students as eligible for internship.
Becky, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say something as a university person. We have tried very hard not to send our students to internship if they don't have minimal competencies. And we got pushback from the university because the person who teaches piano class gave them an A. And it's like, how can you say they're not musically competent because they got an A in piano class, they got an A in voice class? We have no teeth to prevent somebody from going to an internship if they don't meet our standards. This isn't this university, this is a previous university. So you can give us permission to say that, but I don't think you're going to be able to stand up in a court of law with us if we get sued.
Let me put some things out there that people have done in that situation to sort of help with that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Some schools allow you to have a 0 credit assessment. So you can have the proficiency not be tied to a course. Because if they show up in class and they turn in their homework, they pass the class even if they can't perform to standards. So there's the class where they're getting those skills, but then they have to show it and pass this 0 credit barrier course in order to get as a prerequisite for getting into an upper level class or prerequisite for internship eligibility, or there's a lot of different ways that that's been utilized. So instead of tying proficiency to a course, proficiency stands alone. And that helps eliminate some of that. But they got an A from this non-music therapy person.
Yeah, so my current school, that won't work out. We can't have 0 credit courses, and we can't have a course that just tests something. We have proficiencies as part of our fieldwork and internship classes. And so my current university, I'm covered. My previous university, even though we had that, if they had the GPA, if they passed all their classes, we couldn't prevent them from going.
And if I can, you can't prevent them from going, but internship directors are the gatekeepers. You can turn down interns. You do not have to accept them if they don't meet the standards you need at your site. There's a number of comments in the chat about singing, piano, voice, and guitar. It's an important piece of interviews, and there's a lot of chat about that. That's where you can get a better sense of the practical application. And then, hopefully the academic instructors are giving good and honest feedback in the practicums and in the classes where those things are put into play. Because you're right, we don't have control over the piano teacher as piano faculty who's just going to, pass them along. But we are the gatekeepers, and we have choice if they don't meet the standards.
I just wanted to add something in just because I was the one who wrote the comment. So we do an interview process. This year obviously was over Zoom, and our current intern whose guitar skills are just very low, you know, she played 2 songs with the only 3 chords she knew. So we didn't really have the complete knowledge of what she could and couldn't do until she actually arrived. So it's not an excuse, but this is certainly not the first time that's happened. And we did know going into it that her guitar skills were relatively low. I just don't think we realized how low. So she needs a lot of help right now. And we're, you know, we're definitely able to provide that, but it's taken some serious rework on the part of my team too. So I just want to put that out there. We do that entire process, but sometimes things still slip through the cracks.
Well, and I want to go back and challenge the faculty and encourage you to ask for that personal plan for these students. And when they say that their skills are kind of low, find out what that means. It's okay to ask those questions, or ask the student, ask the faculty person. I mean, it's okay to push back and hold the school and the students and the faculty accountable. I will back you on that. I will back you on that for sure. But the school should be providing this information to you so that you know she doesn't have guitar proficiency. She only knows 3 chords.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a comment in the chat about transposition. Anything goes really in your interview audition. Yes, if transposition's an important piece for what you need, absolutely ask people to transpose. Different picking patterns, those sort of things. Those are all within the competencies, so have them demonstrate. And then you get the right sense. One of the things that I would encourage national roster internship directors at least, but certainly academic ones as well, is to give feedback to the faculty if you choose not to take somebody. There are many times when we've encouraged internship directors to give that feedback that the student wasn't prepared or didn't have the skill and wasn't a good match for these reasons. Because I think that's some helpful feedback. It's hard to do, but it closes a loop so people know where there's some gaps.
If the school consistently gets feedback about, let's just go back to the piano skills, not being accepted for internship, then that gives that music therapy faculty something to hang their hat on in going to that piano faculty and saying, you know, here's the kinds of skills that we really need our students to have. How can we get them there from your course? Because the schools want these students to get their internship and graduate. So that feedback is very important.
I also think it's important that the student knows. We can only do so much as faculty and internship directors and, you know, all of these kind of different roles that we play. The student has to have some personal responsibility, because we all know you can't be a good musician without practicing, right? So there has to be, the student needs to be aware of, this is the reason why we didn't accept you. And then we can go from there. Or, you know, the student comes to internship, and I realize you can't test every single musical skill and every single musical instrument. But if your facility uses a lot of guitar, then you may want to do more with guitar. If your facility uses a lot of keyboard or ukulele or drum set or whatever, then maybe that needs to be a part of your internship interview to have them demonstrate that. We have students come in preparing 2 interventions of, we're a private practice, so we see a wide variety, but 2 client populations, and it has to be original and it has to be with a different accompaniment instrument. So you can structure your interview to make sure that you see those skills from that student. It's tough. I mean, we're all responsible, right? Even the student.
Yeah, and I love that reminder that the student does have a very big place in this. If they went through the whole program, they knew what the expectations were. If they're really that weak, they probably have a sense that they're skating at this point. And hearing that from a new external source can be really impactful.
This is Chrissy again, Southeast Rep. I mentioned it in the chat as well, and I actually mistyped. Sorry, I did not mean an in-person interview. I mean an over Zoom interview. But I just wanted to say that we have incorporated a lot, like over quarantine. That's what we spent our time doing last summer, was revamping our interview process and updating our fact sheet and all of these things, because now we have teletherapy as a big part of what we do. And we needed to make sure, even though the competencies don't state technological competency, our site really needs students to have at least a baseline understanding of it. And so we just kind of wanted to know, what are they coming in with? And so we require a lot on Zoom for our interview process. And so I put that in the chat. If anybody has any questions, you can ask.
We're recording this session, and so I believe we'll have the chat, the recording, and a link to this Google Doc that we can share. I'll have Jane share it with the faculty, and we'll share it with the internship, so the national roster folks. And then if you would please, if you're a faculty, share it with the university affiliated folks, and anybody who would like it sent to them directly that's not either a national roster person or a faculty person, please direct message me in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get added to that email list to receive a copy of this information again, just so that you can go back and reread what people have said, because there's some really good things being shared in the chat. There's another comment asking if programs are requiring COVID vaccines, and there's kind of a mixed bag, but it looks like more often than not, it's either yes or regular testing. And I see hospitals there several times. What about people who are in private practice? What's your policy?
Our private practice did not require it, but highly encouraged it. And our interns have all followed through and done that. And I think sometimes too, it might have been even connected with, because they were coming straight out of university. But I know those policies vary by university as well, so.
So I see the comment about the confliction that the university is supposed to be preparing students and sending you students that they are certifying as being internship ready, and yet you're saying they're not, and so now I have to test that myself. That, yes, unfortunately, you do have to test that yourself to protect yourself if you don't want to get one of those students falling through the crack. But I can assure you that we also are pushing back, and after this we'll probably do even more, to make sure faculty are doing their jobs in sending those personal plans and making sure that students are competent, not just having those clinical hours, but actually have the knowledge and the skills to do it. Even if they haven't practiced it enough, that they have the basic skills, and that includes musicianship.
A couple of folks have indicated in the chat that they're using the professional competencies as their mid and final evaluations during student practicums. So that gives honest conversations. It gives you know, a heads up to the students, so something to think about.
Can I ask a separate question? I raised my hand, but I wasn't sure if we were moving on to a different subject.
Yeah.
I was wondering, and this might not be the place to ask, but I just wanted to ask anyway, if there had been any talks on master's level entry for our students, just because in seeing applicants in undergrad and master's equivalency or master's programs, there's such a big difference when it comes to the in-depth work that they are able to do. And so I was just curious. I know this is a controversial topic that we can talk about anytime, and I'm happy to engage in the conversation, but I was just wondering if there had been any updates on AMTA's side.
I can tell you that that is not a conversation that our committee is currently having, but there are other committees that are looking at the education practices and potentially revamping the process. And so master's level entry per se, like we have known it for decades, is not necessarily what's on the table, but definitely shifting the education practices in some way is something that is being looked at. It's not yet fully developed or ready to share, but it is being looked at and listened to. And there are committees that you can find on the AMTA website if you would like to reach out to somebody and share your ideas about that.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, you could actually share them with the 21st Century Commission on the Education and Clinical Training of Music Therapists. We're collecting information. There will be, actually, I'll put it in the chat, the link to the website. There's a Google form, and you can go ahead and put comments on that. At the conference, the commission has an exhibit booth that just provides information, basically where we are now. And so you can follow what the commission's doing.
Thank you so much.
I'm just paying attention to the time, Becky. I think we were good till 7. I know many of us are going to be flipping over to assembly at 8 o'clock, and folks might need a break, but wasn't sure if there were some pressing things that we want to wrap up with.
There is one more comment here I wanted to look at. Speaking of giving faculty feedback regarding applicants not having requirements, are there any schools or internships or regions that have formal means of communication other than email? Is there something on a site eval? So site evals are filled out by the students in national rosters programs. Some university affiliated programs have put that in their expectations. But I would say the feedback probably needs to be direct. You could try a phone call, but usually something in writing has more weight. So I'm not sure. Yeah. Oh, so when the student on the site eval says, this is I'm reading the comment is different than what I was thinking. So when the student says that their prep was inadequate at the end of their internship, they say, oh my gosh, I was not ready for this. That does go to the faculty, and it also goes to the internship regional rep. And so when there are consistent comments like that, that does get looked at. I would like for that, if it happens consistently, to be shared with us. APAC does not see that information. So that's between the school and the internship site and AIAC.
And AIAC would be looking for trends. We would share that with APAC if there was a pattern that was being pulled.
And what we would do is not not necessarily sanction the school or anything. What we would do is we would reach out and see how we could support them in looking at where they might be dropping the ball for these students. And hopefully the information would be able to help us with that. So we very much often support programs in their curricular development or answering questions about, what do other people do and those kinds of things. So we are a resource. We are not just the approval committee. We are a resource. So for those of you who are faculty, it's okay to ask questions. We get them all the time.
I also just wanted to point out one thing really quickly. We are a university affiliated internship, but I did a national roster internship a really long time ago for a long time. And one of the things in the talking about all these kind of ideas of that the student's not qualified and, where does that information go? This right from the university affiliated guidelines, an intern may elect to resign from the internship with written notification. So the intern has the responsibility for themselves to say, this is not working for me. My, whatever preparation I had or whatever this facility site is, it's not working for me. Then it's really in the student's best interest to say, maybe I need to find something different. Maybe a private practice where I'm seeing, 8 different clients with ages and populations. Maybe that's not my thing. Maybe I need to be at a facility where it's more consistent. So I think that's an important thing to recall as well.
I see the comment about equity and inclusion, and I want to address that. We are saying that there are standards, but that's not saying that you can't meet those proficiencies in different ways. That's not saying that people can't be different, but it is saying that you have to have a certain level of musicianship and be able to do the job. So I think each school has to be accountable for how those proficiencies are met and addressed. And those proficiencies, you've read the competencies, they're pretty vague. Every school, there's a wide diversity of how they are assessed and what level of skill is expected. So that's, again, where the internship director who says, I need some real expertise in this type of music, you need to assess that in your interview, and maybe that student's not for you. Maybe that should be clearly stated in your application materials also, so that students are not applying if they don't feel like they're ready for that. I am not trying to shirk responsibility and constantly be saying it's the internship director's responsibility, it's the faculty's responsibility, but most of the concerns that come to me as co-chair of APAC end up going back and being sort of institutional policy and not really AMTA standards. So the guidelines are flexible and there is room for these to be adapted. And where they are not, I would love for you to contact me directly so that we can make those changes. Most of the policies and actual practices get set by the schools. So there is a lot of work to be done for sure. And we are working with schools all the time, taking questions on an almost daily basis about these kinds of things. So come to us with your questions. These two committees are very active year-round, not just once a year at conference. So please don't just wait for this on an annual basis to ask your questions. We would love to hear from you in between. I want to close this out because we are after 6 o'clock. But I want to thank you all for coming and for sharing some really useful information, really important, good questions. But mostly I want to thank you for working with our students.